we have talked about this theme quite a bit, and I want to focus. Obviously, the COVID situation is what it is. I mean, I think, and we can touch on Ron Klain's appointment, which I think, I frankly, I am, from the perspective of somebody who doesn't want this country to be sunk by this pandemic, I think it's an incredibly wise choice. And frankly, as someone who I perceive to be to the left of the Democratic Party, or on the lefter side of the Democratic Party, somewhere in there in terms of my politics, Ron Klain is about as good of a choice as I could imagine from what I would expect from a Biden administration. I mean, I remember when Rahm Emanuel was picked by Barack Obama. And I remember maybe you and I had a conversation about it 10, 15 years ago on the radio, going like, oh, this is not good. Because, I mean, he was a guy who was hostile to the left.
Absolutely.
And that hostility too, all Democrats at that time had a problem of a lack of willingness to confront Republicans. But that didn't, but now, there seems to be sort of like two types of Democrats who are not on the left. It's either, the kinds who are afraid to confront Republicans, or the kinds that are hostile to the left. But and there's sometimes they're both, but that's not necessarily the case. And I think Klain seems like someone who is not necessarily afraid to confront Republicans, and also not hostile to the left. I mean, that's not
seems true to me. I mean, I've been watching Ron Klain for a long, long time. I mean, he's been around for a while, and I've referred to him as sort of the Zelig of Democratic politics going back to the 90s. He's not a particularly old guy, but he's just, I think, very, very young. He was on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's known Joe Biden for a long time. And I agree with your assessment of him. I mean, first of all, I think he is a super competent bureaucrat. I think he understands every aspect of the U.S. government. I think he's been around long enough, and I think he knows how to work the levers. And it's going to be very, very difficult to do that this time. You just can't afford, I mean, one of the, love him or hate him, one thing you have about Joe Biden and probably the team that he's going to bring in are people who have experience in government. And normally I don't care about that. I'd rather have fresh ideas and new blood and all the rest of it. But we are coming into a unique situation with, Donald Trump not only being thoroughly incompetent in every way, he's had a bunch of henchmen in there, consciously destroying what they call the administrative state and working hard at it. So it's going to be, and plus, of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic and an epic economic crisis as a result of the pandemic. So having people who know how to do things, it's going to be hard enough. So there's no time, there's no learning curve. There can't be. So Ron Klain is an excellent choice. And also what you said, which is that, I've been observing him over the Trump years and the latter years of the Obama administration. He's been a visible character in media and around. He writes op-eds. He's somebody that we've been able to observe. And he does not seem to be hostile to the left to me. If anything, I think he has, sensitivities in that direction. It certainly has seemed that way to me. And, maybe we'll be wrong, but he is no Rahm Emanuel. That much I know for sure. He is not that guy. He's not someone who is actively trying to disengage the left. And, I really think and there was the guy, Robert Gibbs, was Obama's, was he his press secretary? I think he was really hostile to the left. And there was a whole cadre in there around Obama that worked, this was one of their primary, goals, was to deactivate the left that had been activated in that Obama campaign. And that was a really, really destructive thing to do. And it just can't happen this time. Biden needs all hands on deck. He cannot afford to alienate any part of the party, I don't think. I mean, the left is much stronger in the Congress now than it was then. Particularly in the House, and also the outside groups are much stronger, and he can't afford to do that. So I think I'm hopeful. Maybe you and I are both going to look back on it 6 months from now and go, boy, were we ever naive. But I that choice and the fact that it was the first choice, aside from the coronavirus task force, which of course was equally important. But for him to put Klain out there right away, I think was a very reassuring thing to, the entire coalition. Just sort of, okay, this is going to work out, at least with this, in this regard. Who knows what else is going to happen? But
Right.
that one, and it's an extremely important job. Now, I remember when Donald Trump came in and he put in, Reince Priebus into that job, and I just went, oh, this guy has no clue. I mean, you got to have somebody good as the chief of staff. It's a gigantic job. Anyway.
And a couple of points I want to expand on. We know, and I think that, it is very difficult for people to get a sense of what, and I don't have a clear sense of what went on. I do know that Steve Bannon, 3 months after the election, went to CPAC and basically said, this is our agenda. We are going to destroy the administrative state. And it is perfectly consistent with Republican ideology. It is perfectly consistent with conservative ideology. I think even the firing, look, as far as I'm concerned, the Pentagon could be 1/20th the size. And I would still think it was too large. So I'm not someone who is, particularly concerned about the operations of the Pentagon beyond like they should be smaller and less. But as an example, I think the firing this week of the civilian leadership, rather than being indicative, it's still there's an open door. I mean, gosh knows what's going to happen between now and January 20th. But I think a big part of that, because they've already done it essentially in all the other agencies, as it were, of the government, is to install and embed and these Trumpistas, these Republican, the far right conservative Republicans in there, the Islamophobes, the bigots, and the war hawks, and install them in there, if only to make it more difficult for Biden to operate. I mean, it's because all this stuff needs to be cleaned up, and it's not easy. Like they're talking, you read some pieces, I think it was in the Washington Post, about the executive orders that Trump is considering. And this is a project by the Republican Party, because this is not just he's putting in orders that he knows can be reversed. They know that the Biden administration, if they have to dedicate resources to reversing these things, it is valuable to them. It means that they don't have the time maybe to come up with judicial picks or whatever. I mean, there are a finite amount of resources, and destruction is always much easier. Anybody who's ever worked in construction knows that the demo, you can bring in anybody, and as long as they have a couple of hammers, they can get the job done. But actually constructing something, you have to put real resources into it. And we know this is the case. We spoke to, and we should probably rebook him, but we spoke to Sam Bagenstos, I think it was about 4 years ago, probably around this time, who had worked at the DOJ for the Clinton administration, during the Clinton administration, and then for the Obama administration. And what he saw after 8 years of the Bush administration, what they had done to the DOJ, I'm quite convinced that in half that time, the Trump administration been able to do more damage to all sorts of agencies. And so that is one thing that's sort of going on here. And I think Klain is bringing in competence. I mean, that's why we're hearing Biden talking to the Mattis people. And Mad Dog Mattis, as far as I'm concerned, should be as far away from the levers of power as possible. But I understand the inclination to bring in people who sort of like know the lay of the land.
Right.
Like, who are the people in these agencies that you got to watch out for, who are there to destroy them? I don't know if I agree with bringing in Mattis people. I just frankly haven't read into that enough. But the idea of bringing in people who might not be politically aligned, but can at the very least clear out the landmines for a while, might not necessarily be a bad idea in certain areas. But let's talk about that aspect of being able to indicate and be clear as to where Republicans stand in all this. I hope that Klain is maybe a hint that Joe Biden, despite the fact of his rhetoric about unity and fever breaking, I hope that there's some understanding that this is that's not the case. I mean, there's a problem with Democrats, and they cannot take any type of political advantage over Republicans, it seems.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was heartened a little bit by the excerpts from Obama's book that came out this week. And I haven't read the book, obviously, but of the excerpts that I read, one of the things seemed coming from him was an awareness, more than an awareness. And he was absolutely declaring the fact that the problem wasn't Trump, that it was Republicans, and that this had been, he said, the only difference between Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell is that he had fewer inhibitions. And I think that is a very, very astute and important observation. And Obama is still kind of the center of the Democratic establishment in many ways, not in any active, practical sense, but just in terms of, his sort of ideological place in the party. And I think that, and obviously very close to Biden, and will act as an unofficial advisor on some level. And I'm sure many of the people that are coming in are also veterans of the Obama administration. So I think that is a good sign. And, and we had heard from people at the end of the Obama administration, like Dan Pfeiffer and some of the others who have written it, subsequently, that it took them way too long to figure that out, which you and I certainly knew, your audience certainly knew. We were screaming at the top of our lungs throughout the first term that they were being taken for suckers, and that they needed to wise up about what was going on and recognize that there was no chance of the kind of comedy or some kind of bipartisanship that, by the way, was promoted very heavily by Joe Biden, even more than others in the administration.
Absolutely.
But so I'm hopeful, though, that maybe even old Joe has learned, new tricks here and understands that they are dealing with a very different kind of party than they were back in the 90s. I mean, if it took them a decade to understand that, it's a little upsetting.